Women were also going through these similar kinds of struggles at the time. You see President Kennedy here. President Kennedy signing the Equal Pay Act of 1963. This was at a time when an organization called 9 to 5 was formed, which was for quote-unquote pink-collar workers, women who did primarily administrative work. Again, another workforce that had gone largely unnoticed, let alone unorganized. Right? So the formation of the Coalition of Labor Union Women, 1974. So this was also a very important time for feminism and the development of feminism in the context of the labor movement. Teachers and government sector workers went on strike in a number of times to get recognition for their unions. Postal worker strike of 1970 was particularly significant, and primarily because, again, illegal. They walked out, started in New York City. Within 2 weeks, 210,000 postal workers across the country had walked out. President Nixon called out the National Guard to try and deliver the mail. They were unable to do so. That strike resulted in a major settlement for federal public worker rights, which has continued to reverberate throughout the federal employment system since that time. In contrast, 1981, the PATCO strike. Anybody remember this? So, air traffic controllers, about 13,000 of them. They had a union, but it was not officially recognized. Their jobs were, as air traffic was growing during this period, their jobs were becoming increasingly stressful. They were trying to negotiate with their employer, the federal government, to alleviate some of the conditions of their work. They got nowhere, and so they went on strike in 1981, and President Reagan fired more than 11,000 air traffic controllers. So the contrast between the postal workers' strike in 1970 and the PATCO strike in 1981 is very, very important. Because in 1970, they were still, remember that period of economic prosperity? We were still there. By 1981, things had changed dramatically, both economically and politically, right? So what Reagan's action against the air traffic controllers did was send a signal. It's open season on unions. And we've been there ever since. So going on from there, we see TSA workers joining the American Federation of Government Employees. AFG is the largest federal government union, federal government employee union. Since that time, somebody mentioned the Freedom Foundation earlier. We have seen new kinds of public sector unionism emerging, home care workers, home child care providers, and we've seen new kinds of attacks. The Freedom Foundation has come out, who was it that you were saying that they're getting mailing out now to people about how...
It's targeted.
And it's targeted. Yeah. Membership is critical. It is not just about whether you're paying the 100% of dues or the 95% of fair share fees. Being a member means that you have made a commitment to your union that is financial, yes, but it is also a commitment that says that you are prepared to actively engage in the union process, whether that is bargaining contracts, whether that is doing politics, whether that is contract enforcement, whether that is leadership development. That's what membership looks like. Right? So when you are talking to your fellow teachers, your fellow educators about why membership is important, keep in mind this entire history. People in your kinds of jobs, in public sector jobs, fought like hell to get the right to be union members. So I got a bunch of other pictures here. Wisconsin, taking away collective bargaining rights from public sector workers except for police and firefighters, limiting what could be bargained over, requiring unions, check this one out, this is the one I think is the most devastating, requiring unions to recertify every year, running a new union election every year. Can you imagine? What else? You'd never be able to do anything else. That would be the only thing you would be able to do for your union every year is recertify it. Here in Oregon, there was tremendous support for the Wisconsin workers. You can see folks out in Salem, out in front of the Capitol. Chicago teachers went on strike in 2012. This was a very, very important strike. I wish I had more time to talk about it, but I'm sure many of you followed it closely. Other teacher strikes in 2015 in Washington, there were these series of rolling strikes. Seattle Education Association went out. 2014, the Medford Education Association went out. We're on strike for 16 days. Portland, they almost went on strike within 48 hours. They were able to settle their contracts. This gives you, so you're asking me about educator unionization rates. This gives you some information about that. And you, again, you're going to get this PowerPoint, so you will have time to look at these slides more carefully. So remember this 30 years of shared prosperity? That's what it's looked like since then. Bottom 20% has lost 11% of its wealth, right? Next 20%, up 2%, 10%, 22%. What do you think would happen if you put the 1% on this chart? So this is the context. This is the economic context in which we're.
Wealth or income?
This is
It's income, right?
income.
Okay, just check.
Yes, thank you for that distinction. Here was where the chart that I told you about, where you see the absolute convergence of the decline of union membership and the decline of the middle class. However, it is the case still that unions make a huge difference, and this gives you some statistics. I want to particularly point out to you that the union difference in terms of wages is even more dramatic for women and for workers of color than it is for white male workers, and this is very important. This is part of the reason why civil rights and labor rights have been so closely aligned. And this is the last slide. I want you to think about this for a second. Here's the narrative about you all. Here you are, evil teachers, pointing your guns at the head of the government, who's then pointing the guns at the head of the taxpayer. Who is missing from this picture?
CEOs, business owners.
Corporation.
And this is the narrative that they want you to be struggling under. That it's all about the relationship between you and the government and the taxpayer. But there is no attention paid in this narrative to corporations, their obligations under the tax system, and under any sense of ethical or moral obligation to society. Remember Andrew Carnegie, who said that there was a responsibility that came along with wealth? Do we have that now? So if you were to put the Koch brothers, let's just say the Koch brothers, if you were to put them in this diagram, where would you put them?
Replace them where the public unions are.
So this would become the Koch brothers?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting idea.
They're also handing money to the government
I
and
think
taking
they're
money
just-
from the taxpayer.
They're
They're
in-
indirectly taking money.
Right.
It's like a cycle.
Yes.
All of the arrows would point to them.
all the money would go to them,
Yeah.
and all the money would, yes, exactly. All the money would flow that way. So think about this narrative. This is the narrative that you struggle under. And I hope that I've given you some sense in the history of how we got here. So for the rest of the class, you guys are going to get to dig more deeply into what these union philosophies mean, what your experience has been in terms of the evolution of labor history. And again, helping you to develop the skills and the knowledge as emerging leaders that you need to be able to carry a new narrative out to your schools, your workplaces.